folks, Scott here with the new Hero Studio card kit of the month for December of 2025. I believe the title of this release is Soup There It Is. So there it is, Soup There It Is. Anyway, we start with a 6x8" stamp set. This is the Your Super stamp set, and soup is the order of the day, it appears. We've got a big soup pot. We've got a layering stamp for the inside and the edges, plus noodles inside, a lid. We've got a bowl and a spoon, layering stamps for those as well, a big spoon for the pot, and of course all sorts of vegetables to go in your soup. We've got onions and mushrooms, looks like some basil, green pepper or peppers, garlic, tomatoes, carrots. There's a pepper grinder, some steam that looks like an onion cut open. Lots of fun sentiments here. Life is short, lick the bowl. Feel better fast. Your super, very cute. Get well soon, perfect for some nice chicken soup. Super big thank you. There's a little pun for you. Consider this a big squishy hug. I think that comes into play a little later. Deep breath, friend, you got this. Looks like we get to do some coloring with some stamps this month. And of course, we get matching dies as well. These will cut out all of the images and all of the sentiments as well. All of those sentiment dies, all of the vegetables, the stock pot, the soup bowl. So that's the Your Super stamp set and coordinating dies. Then we have this big squishy hugs die set. It looks like we got two hands, a heart. These look like sleeves, obviously sleeves. I had to die cut this to see exactly what is going on with this. And this is what it gives you. Let's die cut this from some ivory cardstock. This is the smaller one, is the top half. So those are completely two different pieces, just interwoven together. This is the bottom half, which is the larger one. And then there is, of course, this heart die. So if you die cut a heart, it will, of course, slip right into those hands. There's our big squishy hug. I'm going to have to play with this. This is a great, I realize it's only December, but this would make a great Valentine card, etc., etc. This is the Big Squishy Hug die set. Big Squishy Hugs. And of course, we do get some cardstock in our kit. These are 8.5 by 5.5 inch sheets of cardstock. We've got poppy, pomegranate, carrot, terracotta, cinnamon, beeswax, saffron, Tuscan, truffle, and alabaster. Those are our 10 cardstocks. We also get a little extra bonus this month. We get brown acrylic speckle. Brown acrylic speckle. This is for spattering colors on your cardstocks. This says, add a drop of color to a glass mat or craft sheet and use a brush to pick up color. Tap the brush over your project to add a brown speckle. Brown acrylic speckle. Well, this is certainly a very unique card kit. Let's dig right in and make some soup. And here are our 10 cards for the month of December. Everything's on white card basis. Everything is an A2 card. Of course, I'm going to reach for the Your Super stamp set to get things rolling and to get some coloring in. I also grabbed an old Bo Bunny paper pad. This is the Family Recipes collection. All of these pattern papers. I thought some of those might come in handy with a little soup-themed kit this month. I am, of course, a big fan of soup. When we make soup, we always make a great big pot, so there are plenty of leftovers. You'll always find a tub of frozen soup in the freezer at this house. So our first card this month is Your Super card. There you go. That's a fun little pun. Your Super. I decided to do some stamping and masking instead of relying on the coordinating dies to start with. I really only need a mask for the green pepper and the top right side of the pot. So first I stamped the pepper with VersaFine Onyx black ink, and then I stamped and cut a mask of the pepper and placed that over the pepper, just like that, and stamped the carrot and the onion. Of course, I did make a mask for the soup pot as well, masked off the right side of the soup pot, and then stamped the pepper grinder in the back. All of the shapes in this stamp set are really very simple and quite easy to cut masks for. Everything here is stamped on Bristol smooth cardstock and colored with my Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. Now I do have to, I have to give a big shout out to my Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. I got this set of 36 pens exactly 10 years ago. I got them for Christmas 10 years ago, and all of these pens are still going strong. Not one has dried out, and I feel like I use them pretty regularly. Now, when paired with Strathmore Bristol Smooth cardstock, the blending and watercolor possibilities of these pens seem almost effortless, and they last. I can't believe I've had these for 10 years. Okay, enough with the commercial. As a final touch on this vignette, I stamped the steam rising from the pot using Simon Says Stamp Barely Beige ink. I die cut the panel to, this is actually 3 1/8 by 4 inches with a Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die, and I added a thin black mat behind. The background is from that Bow Bunny pattern paper pad cut to 4 inches by 5.5 inches. I glued that to the center of an A2 white card base. I added some Love from Lizzie pinstripe peel-offs on the edges of that pattern paper. That gives us a nice little touch of shine on the sides. Those are brown mirror peel-offs. And I glued the matted vignette down to the center of the pattern paper, and I stamped the sentiment on a scrap of Bristol cardstock with Hero Hues Root Beer Reactive ink, and I embossed that with some clear embossing powder. I die cut the sentiment and 2 blanks with the matching die. I stacked and glued the 3 layers together, then added them to the card front. The shine on the sentiment matches the shine on the peel-offs, and the tile background feels extra homey. And a perfectly good pun. You're super. Now, in that family recipes paper pad, I had some old extra backgrounds that I had used on an old regiftable recipe book that I created quite a long time ago. And that red polka dot with heart trim reminded me of a placemat. And that gives us our Life is Short, Lick the Bowl. I stamped the bowl and the spoon with VersaFine Onyx black ink on some plain ivory cardstock and stamped the detail of the bowl with Spiced Marmalade Distress Oxide ink. I'd stamped the contents of the bowl with Antique Linen Distress Oxide ink. Then I stamped the noodles in the soup with more Antique Linen ink and embossed that with clear embossing powder. I colored the rest of the bowl and spoon with my Zig markers and die cut them both with their matching dies. I did make a paper template for that soup die just so I could get the die in just the right spot. It's a little hard to find. There's the top, I think. That's right. There you go. So I just made a paper template to help me place the die to die cut that bowl of soup. I did some slicing and dicing to that old red pattern paper, and I shrunk it down to about 3 inches by 1 3/4 inches. That's the perfect size for a little placemat. I added a black mat behind the placemat to highlight the heart trim. The background is white cardstock cut with an Altenew cross-stitch canvas die. This is a great little die for adding texture. You can also do cross-stitch with this. And then I trimmed that to 3 3/4 by 5 inches with a Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die. I ink blended with Antique Linen Distress Oxide ink around the edges. I matted that with black cardstock, and then I spattered some of the brown acrylic speckle on that for an added touch of distress. That acrylic speckle is great for dark cardstocks. You can see on the black mat. You see, can you see that? There you go, down there. On the black mat, you can see how well that brown speckle shows up on that dark cardstock. Finally, I glued that background to a white card base. I stamped the sentiment on a scrap of white cardstock with VersaFine Onyx Black ink and embossed it with clear embossing powder. I die cut the sentiment with the matching die and 2 blanks, stacked them, glued them together. The placemat is glued down to the background. The bowl is attached to the placemat with some foam tape, and the spoon is glued to, this is a 3/4 inch scrap of watercolor paper with torn edges, and it's folded in half to be a napkin. There you go. I like the shine on the noodles in the soup, and the napkin is just the perfect touch. Looks like dinner to me. Lick the bowl. Now, the die-cut borders on the bowl and spoon didn't bother me so much here because they were stamped on ivory cardstock, which is the same as the placemat trim, and that helped them blend in. But in general, I'm not a big fan of the die-cut borders. So I turn back to masking again, and we've got a super big thank you card for you here with the lid on top of the pot of soup, a spoon sticking out. I stamped the pot lid on a panel of white cardstock, and I cut a mask to fit on top. Then I stamped the pot. Both of those are stamped in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I stamped the pot detail down here with some Concord and Ninth sea glass ink, and then colored the rest of the image with my Prismacolor colored pencils. I stamped and fussy cut the big spoon from some scrap of white cardstock. I colored that the same. I cut a slit in the soup for the spoon to go in, just enough room to fit that spoon in between the lid and the side of the pot. Now, since I had the masks, I decided to cover the pot and the lid with the masks, and I used an old Carta Bella designer diamond background stamp with antique linen distress oxide ink to stamp the background right over the masks. I stamped that background a second time using vintage photo distress oxide ink around the edges. Now, while the masks were still on, I blended a little antique linen ink around the bottom and sides of the pot with a light touch around the edges and all over the background. I also stamped the steam coming out of the pot, again with Simon Says stamp, barely beige ink. Then I die cut the panel to 3 3/4 by 5 inches of the Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die, added a thin black mat before gluing them down to an A2 white card base. I slipped the spoon into the soup through the slit and attached the end of it to the card front with foam tape. I think that adds an interesting touch of dimension to an otherwise flat card. I stamped and embossed the sentiment as usual. VersaFine Onyx Black ink, clear embossing powder. Looks like a nice tomato bisque inside that pot. I hope you have some grilled cheese on hand. A super big thank you. Now, there is one sentiment in this kit that says, feel better fast. How exactly do you speed up the recovery process? Well, maybe like this. Feel better fast. More soup. Now, using my MISTI, I stamped the bowls and spoon on a panel of Nina Classic Crest Solar White 80-pound cardstock. Stamped those with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I colored the bowls and the spoons with my Uhuhu alcohol markers, and I used a variety of Distress Oxide ink pads with a brush and water for the soups. I just filled those in, watercoloring with Distress Oxide inks. I stamped the noodles in the bottom center bowl with antique linen Distress Oxide ink and embossed that with clear embossing powder. Short of covering the entire contents of the bowls with glossy accents, I think adding some shine to the noodles does the trick and adds just the right amount of shine to your soup. I stamped and embossed the sentiment as usual. I die cut this panel to 3 1/4 by 4 inches and added a thin black mat behind. This background is some old scrapbooking made simple Dottie Primaries cardstock. That's die cut to 3 1/4 by 5 inches with a lawn fawn stitched rectangle die, and a thin black mat is glued behind that. Those are glued to the white card base, and the colored panel and mat are glued on the background. We've got, looks like we've got pea soup, some tomato soup, some miso soup, some chicken vegetable, whatever your pleasure. Feel better fast. Now, I still wanted to do a pot of soup with a lid that flips up and hopefully make it an interactive card that kind of blows the lid off the pot, to coin a phrase. And that gives us our interactive card, a pull right there. We give that a pull and we get well soon right there in our soup. First off, I have to admit, I love this dark blue pot. This looks like it came from Williams-Sonoma. I stamped the pot in the center of an A2 panel of Neenah Classic Crest 80-pound solar white cardstock with VersaFine ink, and I colored it with my Ohuhu alcohol markers. This is B350, B380, and B440. I stamped the lid on a scrap of Neenah cardstock and colored it the same. I fussy cut the lid with a 1/2 inch wide tab coming off of the top edge. You only need about 1 inch of length at the most. I did stamp the soup and the detail noodles using antique linen distress oxide ink. I used that a little heavier on the edges and a little lighter in the center. And then I stamped the noodle sentiment. Those have got to be alphabet noodles. I stamped that with Versamark ink and embossed it with some Love from Lizzie ivory pearl embossing powder. I thought that was just the great noodle color and shine. But to get a little more contrast, I added a touch of shadow to the left and bottom sides of the letters with a brown Pigma Micron pen. That's fairly easy to do with embossed letters. The embossing will help guide your pen. Again, since I already had the masks, I masked off the pot and stamped the background using the Concord and Ninth Sunshine Turnabout stamp set. And yes, I do use the Concord and Ninth Turnabout jig as well. This is one of my favorite and most used turnabout stamps in my stash. I stamped that with fossilized amber, peeled paint, candy apple, and spice marmalade distress oxide inks. I love that, works great. So I trimmed the panel to 3 3/4 by 5 inches, and I glued a thin black mat behind. Now, using a T-square and the pot lid, I marked where the tab on the lid fell. So here, let me do a quick little how-to on this flip top. So here I have the pot stamped on cardstock. Here I have the lid stamped and fussy cut with a 1/2 inch. This is just a 1/2 inch tab sticking out of the top. Now, you would think you would fold this tab over where it meets the pot lid, but the secret to make this flip up with a pull tab is to make the fold on the tab about 1/4 inch away from the top of the pot. So we'll put the pot right there at 3. We're gonna score it at 3 1/4, and that's where we're going to fold it. So just go ahead and fold it down right there. So we'll put the pot lid on top of the pot, and let's make a quick mark where the tab falls. Mark there, mark there. That's where the tab falls. Now we'll take a T-square, square this up with the side of the card, and we're going to cut a slit between those marks. I'm going to make that slit like right at the bottom edge of that pot lid, and we'll go from one mark to the other. Then I'm going to scoot over the tiniest fraction and do another cut. So that will give me a slot and not just a slit. Does that make sense? There you go. You can see we've got 2 little lines there. And pop that little slot out. There's our slot. There's where it falls on the front. Go ahead and erase those lines. So then we'll take our lid and slide it through that tab. We're going to slide it clear till the end to where it lands. And you almost can't see that slit at all. So we'll turn it over to the back. We want to make something that will hold this tab in place. So side is going to get the pull tab, and you don't want to pull the pull tab and have the whole thing slide down. So I'll take just a piece of cardstock. We'll cut this right about 1/4 of an inch. Doesn't have to be fancy. And we're going to glue this right here. So it's a little wider than the tab. It needs to be a little thinner. And then we'll glue that just to the tab. You don't want to glue it to the sides. You want to glue it just to the tab. Make sure it folds over fine. It should be right at about the line of our slot there. That looks good. I'll hold that in place. Now, whenever I make a pull tab card, I always make my pull tabs a 1/2 inch wide. I do these doubled up. This is 2 layer. This is a 1 inch piece of cardstock scored down the middle, folded in half, and glued together. So these are my standard pull tab type cards. So once that holder glues on, then you can attach your pull tab. This, of course, would need to be cut down to match your card. But a little glue and your pull tab. Again, you'd like this to be nice and straight, so you can use your T-square again to make sure you're gluing it on there nice and straight, so your pull tab isn't doing anything really wacky. Let that dry for just a moment, and then when you give it a pull, flop, the lid pops up. That's the big magic there. You can see that it's pushing the card up a little when it flips, but that is the idea right there. Just using a little different fold on the tab on that pot lid makes the trick work. Now, I did stamp another lid using Simon Says Stamp Barely Beige ink. I wiped off the knob, and I fussy cut that to go on the inside of the lid. Of course, alcohol markers bleed through enough, so I used that to give us a clean interior. A couple of cardstock channels on either side help keep the pull tab in place, and I use a 1/2 inch punch to expose the pull tab. And of course, that is stamped with one of my favorites, the My Favorite Things interactive labels stamp at the bottom of the card. I glued the whole mechanism down to a white card base, being careful not to glue down the pull tab. And there we have a fun interactive card ready to delight the recipient. Get well soon, no matter how sick you are. And again, I just love that blue pot. Okay, enough with the soup. Let's turn our attention to the Big Squishy Hugs die set. I did ascertain that the 2 sets of sleeve dies, we've got one pair with cuffs and the other pair with stripes, they do not match. So it appears that we have 2 different sleeve options. And so that gives us, consider this a Big Squishy Hug. Now, I die cut the 2 hand dies from plain ivory cardstock. I color the hands with my go-to R18, 19, and 20 Ohuhu markers. I die cut the 2 striped sleeves from some plain gray cardstock and the stripes from some darker gray cardstock. This is what I used. And once I glued the stripes to the sleeves, I suddenly had what appeared to be prison garb. So I grabbed an R180 Ohuhu marker and colored over the gray. That gives us the nice red there. That's much better. So I masked off the arms and ink blended Hero Hues, Lemon Drop, Creamsicle, Grape Slush, Thistle, Splash, and Blue Hawaii reactive inks for the background. Half on one die cut, half on the others, of course. So let's go ahead and stick our bottom piece to our card front. So this is the bottom. We're going to match it up with our A2 card base. So now let's try the top with the hand up on top. Try and match our edges. Now those edges are pretty matched. We've got just a little bit of a conflict. Finally, I glued the heart in place, then I glued the hands down and tried to ignore the tiny buckle where the arms overlap. There's just that little buckle right there, just tiny, tiny buckle. I stamped and embossed the sentiments as usual on a scrap of white cardstock, die cut them and 2 blanks each with their matching dies, stacked them, glued them together, and then glued them down to the card front. That is a really unique die that creates a delightfully whimsical card for conveying big squishy hugs to anyone and everyone you'd like. Consider this a big squishy hug. If only we had sound effects. So let's see if we can make these arm dies work without any sleeves at all, and maybe try to illustrate the action of a hug. And that gives us a, consider this, a big squishy hug with our 2 hands opening up to either side. These slot back together fairly simply and lay down very nice and flat. So again, I die cut the 2 arm dies from some plain ivory cardstock. I colored the hands as usual. I also die cut the 2 arms from some pattern paper in my stash. This is from the Sizzix Geometrics paper pad. And I die cut the 2 cuffs from the backside of that pattern paper. I trimmed away the hands from the pattern paper at the same point on both arms. Now, if you put the hands face together, they are exactly the same hands, just in different direction. That's the amount of hand I cut off. I tried to cut off the exact same amount of hand on both sides. There you go. Those hands match up perfectly. Then I cut a piece of white cardstock to 4 3/4 inches wide by 5 1/2 inches, and I scored the long sides at 1/4 inch and folded those both towards the inside of the card. So this is what I did with the white card back, is had tabs on either side. Then I glued the ivory die cut to the back side of the flaps on the card base and trimmed away the rest of the flap on either side. Then I glued the pattern paper die cuts on top of the ivory die cuts and on top of the flaps, so you don't see the flaps, and leaving the hands exposed. So the arms interweave together very nicely. I added the contrasting cuff to both arms. We don't need no stinking sleeve dies. I stamped and embossed the sentiment on the front as usual and added the ellipsis at the end with a Pigma Micron pen. And this heart is die cut from some plain red cardstock and the sentiment stamped with Versamark ink and embossed with white embossing powder. I glued the heart to the inside of the card. I suppose you could glue the heart to one of the arms and let it appear in the hug, but this seemed to be one of the easiest ways to get these die cuts to be a unique opening for this card. The cuffs sometimes interfere with each other, but overall, a pretty smooth operation. Consider this another big squishy hug. Of course, you can just cut away the arms from the rest of the 2 dies and put them wherever you want. And that gives us a You Got This card. It's sweater weather. I die cut the 2 arms, only the arms, from some plain ivory cardstock, colored the hands as usual. Again, that's a Hoo-Hoo R18, R19, R20. I took a 3 3/4 by 5 inch panel of white cardstock, and I embossed this knitting pattern on the whole panel. This is one of my favorite old embossing folders. This is from a Love from Lizzie October 2018 card kit. I really like this because it's got this large section and then 3 like stripes going down. So I actually embossed the background with this section and then embossed the sleeves with the straight sections. You can tell that difference here when you look closely. I added some ink blending around the edges and over the front of the embossing using antique linen Distress Oxide ink. I glued that to a thin black mat and glued those down to a white card base. Now I die cut the cuffed sleeves from the same cardstock, embossed them with the same knitting pattern too. I added plain white cuffs over the embossed cuffs and ink blended more antique linen along the bottom edges. I glued the sleeves on top of the ivory arms. I stamped and embossed the sentiment as usual and die cut it along with 2 blanks with the matching die and stacked and glued the sentiment together. This heart is an old Sizzix heart cross stitch emboss and cut folder. I've had this for a long time. It may have come with one of my original die cutting machines. I can't remember where I got it. I thought that cross stitch texture would be nice along with all the sweater texture. I attached the heart to the center of the card front using some thick foam tape, and I decided where to place the arms, trimmed off the excess at the ends before gluing them to the left and right edges of the card front and then to the top of the heart. No need to fuss with overlaps or buckling. A pair of arms is always useful. You got this. Now, when I was die cutting the stripes for the other sleeves, I noticed that the negative die cut was actually kind of interesting. There's something there. And that gives us a Go Team card. It's rugby season. So I took an A2 panel of cinnamon cardstock from the kit and die cut the 2 sleeve stripes right into that panel. I did tape the 2 stripes dies together and carefully spaced them around in a circle and die cut the pair 5 times for a total of 10 arms. I then die cut 10 hands from ivory cardstock and colored them as usual with my Ohuhu markers. Now then, to decide where all of the hands went, I slipped the die cut hands into the last stripe of the arms and pulled them down until they were snug. Then I marked where they crossed the bottom of the stripe, pulled it out, trimmed off the hands right above that mark, and then stuck them back in and glued them to that stripe. Very easy. It looks really great. I'm really pleased with how that came out. Looks like a Go Team huddle to me. And the striped shirts, I think, are very rugby. I die cut the cinnamon layer with a 3 1/4 by 5 inch Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die, carefully keeping tabs on the orphaned corner pieces. Just those 3. This one was still attached. I glued that down to a 3 3/4 by 5 inch piece of the terracotta cardstock, remembering to add those corners of the stripes back into place. I die cut the sentiment from some plain white and black cardstock using an old alpha die set from the Love from Lizzie Oh Baby special edition kit. One of my favorite alpha dies, all in caps. It's a nice small size. I die cut those from black and white and glued the letters together for a bit of a black shadow behind the white. Then I glued them down to the card front. I, of course, then did add the "You got this" sentiment on the inside of the card. I really like this. This is a totally terrific masculine card for any sports enthusiast on your list, or any sports playing female on your list too. Go Team! Now, over the last year or so, Waffle Flower came out with stamps, dies, and stencils in their Postage collage collection. I slowly gathered the essentials of that release, thinking that it might be the perfect way to showcase smaller images. And that leads us to have a super birthday. This is exactly what I had in mind. I die cut the Postage collage die from some 110-pound Nina Classic Crest Solar White cardstock, and then I arranged all the food stamps. Now, since I already had that green pepper mask, I went ahead and added that in front of the pepper grinder. Now, I stamped all the food items with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I stamped the solid soup stamp with antique linen and little vintage photo distress oxide inks around the edges. I created this punny sentiment using my Silhouette software and the Take Charge font. I printed that right in place using my piggyback printing method and my new Epson EcoTank printer. Our old Canon printer died while we were working on Christmas cards, so I had to get rid of it. I could only replace it for like $800. So we made the switch to Epson EcoTank printers. I'll let you know how it works. It worked very well for my little piggyback printing method. Now, I did take the Postage collage block stencil and ink blended all of the stamped backgrounds with Hero Hues Splash, Key Lime Fizz, Thistle, Lemon Drop reactive inks, and then antique linen and vintage photo distress oxide inks. I used my Ohuhu alcohol markers to color everything with the help of some white gel pen for the onions and the garlic. Once everything was colored, I stamped the noodles in the soup with vintage photo distress oxide ink and embossed that with some clear embossing powder. I also have the Postage collage stamp set, so for a final touch, I stamped the forever and the prices and the hugs inside and all of the stamp markings last. I added a black mat behind the sheet of stamps and glued those down to an A2 white card base. And who doesn't need another birthday card in their stash? I'm thrilled to finally see how this Waffle Flower Postage collage collection can work with a group of smaller stamps. And this is perfectly in line with the whole Hero Studio theme this month. I really like how this turned out. Have a super birthday. And before you know it, that's all 10 cards for this month. I think this is a handsome batch of cards with lots and lots of color. I did manage to use every stamp in the Your Super stamp set except for the Deep Breath Friend. Somehow that just seemed a little too personal for a greeting card. I don't know. I also opted for some simple masking this month instead of relying on the coordinating dies to create my vignettes. But I always love and use those sentiment dies. I did use every die in the Big Squishy Hugs die set, but I didn't use much of the brown acrylic speckle. It just didn't feel very appropriate for most of these cards. I tend to do more speckling with more vintage and grungy cards, but this is really nice to have on hand. Acrylic is the secret there. It'll show up on dark paper. So we ended up with a wide variety of cards colored in a number of different mediums with some good puns, even one extra, and even some interactivity. I really had a great time playing with this kit. As usual, if you'd like to get this kit or anything else in this month's studio release for yourself, you will need to subscribe to the Hero Studio Card Kit of the Month by December 27th. If you do go shopping at Hero Arts, please use my links listed below. I make a small commission from whatever you buy at no cost to you, and that helps support this page and keeps a little bit of fun, inspiration coming your way. It is so very, truly appreciated. And once again, we have reached the end of another year. I can't believe how time flies. Thank you so very, very, very much for sharing your time with me here. I hope you have enjoyed yourself and maybe even learned something new this year. Remember, you are the reason I keep posting. If you enjoyed this video, please click the thumbs up at the top of this page. And if you're not a subscriber, please click the subscribe button and the notify bell so you're notified when I post a new video. Please take a few moments to like me, list me, pin me, post me. Basically, just share this post with everybody you can. And remember, don't run with scissors. As always, I send you and yours love and light. happy holidays and happy crafting. For more detailed information, better pictures, and product links, please visit my website at cardcutups.com.